Well, women are making strides in their careers, but when it comes to equality in the workplace, it's not a level playing field. In fact, on average, women still earn less than their male counterparts and often feel overlooked when it comes to career advancement opportunities. Dora Savron is the executive dean at the University of Phoenix. So there's a new survey that came out. What did it say?
Well, not surprisingly, we learned that men are more likely to agree that they have more equal pay opportunities and opportunities to showcase their worth than women do. So we still, even though we've made improvements, we still have work to do.
What did it say about how women view their access to opportunities in the workplace?
So 30% of the women in the survey that are employed responded that they do not agree with equal opportunity and pay particularly. And two of the reasons they had mentioned is that they didn't take the advantage of negotiating their salary at the beginning and that they feel like their gender alone contributes to that. So for us, it's really important to understand why that perception is there so we can deal with it and learn how to address it.
Well, I like to instill people with hope. So let's give people some hope and tell women how can they close their own personal gender gap.
Sure, there's a number of things they can do. First, they can actually be their own self-advocates. They can speak up, share successes they've had with their teams, also take on new responsibilities and offer or participate in new projects so that they could stretch their skills. The second thing is really taking advantage of the negotiating power, and that's easier to do in the beginning when they're taking on a new job or getting promoted. So they have opportunities to maybe negotiate beyond salary with time off and flex time. And then the third one is really to understand their own worth. Sometimes we feel like we need to be perfect before we take on additional experiences, but those skills that we have are transferable and we should take a risk and try new things and continue to learn and grow in our education.
Now let's talk to the employers out there that watch our show. What do they need to do or change in their process to improve equal pay opportunities?
So 40% of our respondents had indicated that transparency on what it would take to increase more pay, to get raises or to be promoted, additional communication and transparency around goals and expectations, and then finally continuing growth opportunities, so continuing education, professional development. But I would emphasize that we shouldn't just wait for that to happen. Women can go back to the tips we offered earlier and really take control by advocating for themselves and raising their hands and offering suggestions on how they can continue to help.
I love it. All great advice. Where can our viewers go to find more information about the survey and the tips that we mentioned?
We could go to phoenix.edu for additional details on the survey and additional tips.
Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And a special thanks to University of Phoenix College Health Professions for bringing us that interview.